Good day and welcome to Mental Health and You. My name is Cynthia Timms and I'm your host. Mental Health and You, a show designed to help break down the barriers, hopefully, of mental wellness in communities of color. Today I would like to welcome two guests who will help me, hopefully, do that. This is Daniel Lanzilotta.
Thank you.
How do you say it? I don't want to make
Lanzilotta.
Lanzilotta, an environmental artist
Thank you, yes.
who will talk about the environment, his artistry, and mental health. And also Antoine Craigwell, the president and CEO of DBGM.
Thank you.
Yes, a documentary artist, a documentary filmmaker, and together, all three of us hopefully will try to help you, support you in your fight, in your struggle, so we can show you and hopefully help you and hopefully make you see, if that's possible, that taking care of your health is not, it's a cool thing, it's a healthy thing, and it's okay. And there's many ways that you can do that, and you're not alone. I'd like to start off this conversation by first thanking you, both of you gentlemen, again.
Thank you, Cynthia, for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Well, you're very welcome. But Daniel, it was very curious. I was very curious when I was, when we first met. I was doing my research for this show, and environmental artists.
Yes.
And its connection to mental health. That had me intrigued as an artist, as someone who is concerned about the environment, as well as we all should. But what connection is that to mental health? I mean, what role does that play?
It depends on what layers you want to take or what road you want to take. If you want to take plastic debris and hormonal disruptions through BPA, leaching from plastic bottles that go into the body and leach into food, that's one avenue. There are other avenues of plastic debris that affect us. Just the fact that you have this beautiful picture as your background, it's the negative ion is the happy ion. That's why people go to the beach. And our oceans are dying. They're polluted. They can't take any more plastic.
Wow.
The food chain is polluted. So we're eating plastic.
So as an artist, though, what role can you play? How do you bring this to light?
I'm a Bronx 200 artist. I was born and raised in the Bronx.
And what does Bronx 200 mean?
There's a group of us from the Bronx, or either living or working in the Bronx, that are part of this community called the Bronx 200. I was born and raised in the city, in the Bronx. I come from a diverse background. My ethnic background is very diverse and wide. And so I'm very concerned for people in general and how plastics play into their mental health, into their well-being. And I use art as a means to have that conversation. I don't come along as an environmentalist and beat people over the head because they're using plastics. I come from it from the angle of beauty. And once people get attracted to this, and then we can have a conversation. I open up the pathway through beauty. And beauty is innate in us. It doesn't matter what color you are, what sexual orientation, or what religion you are. We're wired for beauty. And I see beauty in everything I do. I was raised in the Bronx. I was raised here in this city. And I'm concerned about my brothers and sisters. I'm an American. And you open your statement with people of color and what's happening here. I'm an American because of that heritage. It's my culture, it's our country. And I feel like if I don't make a statement about what's happening here with black people, then no one is doing it.
So how do you do it? Where is the artistry in it? Okay, I'm hearing that, but as an artist, you pointed to, what's that on your?
These are bottles. This is French debris.
Okay.
And Brooklyn debris and Connecticut debris. So worldwide, this is an issue. It's not just
Where's the Bronx debris?
There's probably some in there. There's a little bit in there somewhere.
Okay.
I can't remember all the parts, but there's for instance, the Bronx has the highest rate of asthma probably in the country.
Right.
It's predominantly affecting people of color. This people of color live in the Bronx, and so that concerns me. It concerns me to see and walk around how neighborhoods are and what kind of trash is in the street or what kind of trash is being
And
thrown
where you
out.
think that from? Is that what mentality is that trash? I mean,
It's all across all social economic strata. It
because
has
that
nothing to
bothers
do
me
with,
too, to a point where I'm one of those people who actually will pick up a bottle, because it bothers me so.
it's a little bit more profound than
I know it's
that.
profound, but
It's in the food chain. It's in the water. It's in the soil. It's in the air. So we have a convergence of all these things, and then on top of that, it's over-the-counter drugs. It's prescribed drugs. So when you have all these kinds of influences coming at you all at once, intersectionality it's called
Right.
in terms of how many things are coming at a person. So as an environmentalist, I speak to water, air, food webs, food chains, and all those things are affecting each other. They're all toxic. They all have kinds of poisons in them. And so in a place like the Bronx, you have it's sort of out of control at this point, and it affects people. So if you're going
How
into
does it affect people?
well, food. If you don't have enough discretionary dollars to buy good, wholesome food, then you're eating bad food, and bad food has a lot of chemicals in it. It has a lot of preservatives in it. Some of those preservatives are based on chemistry, like polypropylene, which is a plastic.
Okay.
So there's leaching in those foods, and that's not healthy. It's not good for your mental health. Those things are really bad. Sugars, corn syrup, all these things are converging in people's bodies. Fat cells retain that stuff. So that's a big issue. I'm very concerned to see how this all plays out, because it doesn't seem to be getting better. And that's across the board. It doesn't matter who you are. And I'd like to say that toxicants are very democratic.
So what can make it better? How would a better look like to you?
Better
How
is
you as the artist can educate.
For instance, I use an example at the dollar store.
Okay.
So you're a black single mom. You're living in Bedford-Stuyvesant. You're living in the Bronx. You're living in Trenton. You're living in Detroit. You're living in places like that. The dollar stores are strategically placed in these neighborhoods, and those stores are probably 95% plastic. I know because I go in and out of them quite often.
Right.
They hit you. They're off-gassing, and you buy a colander for pasta. That plastic is garbage. It's junk, and it's going to break down. It's going to crack. It's going to be broken, and so that's going to go into the garbage. So in families like that, people of color, brown and black people, young people, one means for people to get out of that situation is to join the military. And the military is going where? They're going over to the Middle East to get crude oil. All plastic is based on crude oil, as we know it today. So it's like a little sliver of how the whole thing operates. So it's a vicious cycle, in my opinion, to see that kind of thing going on. Because how do you get out of that? Otherwise, you have dollar stores or discount stores that sell predominantly plastic items. Those items are touching food or breaking down, or children are playing with it. They're a lot of children's toys are plastic, and those kinds of chemicals and toxicants are going into children's bodies, not just through food, but through sucking on it or touching it. You absorb a lot of these types of toxins through your skin. And so that's a very big concern, because that's when you start breaking it up and starting to see how it magnifies across the board for everybody.
And how is it affecting us? You said physically. How is it affecting us emotionally?
Well, BPA is a hormonal disruptor, and that just plays havoc with your hormones. I mean, that's not good right there. That's in the food. That's in when you buy. You have a choice, and the choice is not to use plastic at all. But if you're in a socioeconomic situation where you can't afford to buy better products or better food, you're always going to resort to those things that are based on the economy, what you can afford.
Right.
And so you're going to get trapped into that idea. So instead of buying a metal colander, non-aluminum, stainless steel, that's a small fortune right there to buy an object like that. You're going to continue to buy the plastic, and that plastic is going to go out into the garbage. Plastic doesn't break down you can't compost it. It's forever. It's just smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
So be that as it may, now, What do you think about the new law banning plastics? You think that's going to be a
Well,
good thing?
there are attempts to do that now with styrofoam takeaway things and
right.
coffee cups and
Right.
the plastic bag, of course. It has to start somewhere. And that's the best thing you can do is not to have it accessible and not
Okay.
to use it. So once you stop using it, you're sending messages to the manufacturers to either change the formulations into more plant-based plastics like hemp or avocado pits. They're looking at that and they're manufacturing things out of Mexico out of avocado pits. So that's really where we should be heading.
Okay. That's interesting. A lot of food for thought, a lot of everything.
It's a very big issue.
That it is. That it is. Mr. Craigwell. Craigwell, my bad. Antoine.
Yes,
Yes.
Cynthia.
We're talking about environment. Daniel was talking about one type of environment. The environment also that I think is poisoning people. My experience as a peer support specialist, the environment of poverty, the environment of racism. You are the president and CEO of an organization that deals and helps, helps people. How is your organization dealing with that environment of just discrimination, the environment of racism, the environment of not being accepted? Why is it necessary?
Your question, Cynthia, is like Daniel was saying earlier about environmentalism,
Yes.
is multi-layered.
Indeed.
I would suggest that when we want to talk about mental health in people of color communities, that is also multi-layered because there are a number of different factors that play into mental health affecting people of color. Before the show, we were talking briefly about the role of racism and intergenerational trauma
Right.
affecting black and people of color. One of the things that comes up that we see contemporaneously is what is called maternal transgenerational trauma, but we also see trauma that is vicarious trauma. But we also see transgenerational trauma.
What does that mean?
That means that Professor Darcy, Professor Gray from Tuskegee University,
Yes.
from Tufts University in New Orleans, published a paper in November 2018, last November, where she discussed maternal transgenerational trauma. And she suggested that, for example, a young woman who may have experienced some type of trauma before she begins to have children, that trauma then becomes imprinted in her cell structure.
Right.
That then, when she becomes pregnant, that trauma is passed on to the child. And the child is then born with that trauma. Now, that is just one, when we want to talk about the maternal transgenerational trauma, that's just one segment of it. Because if you go back a little further and say, well, okay, this young woman at, let's say, 12 or 13, okay, when she was born, she would have been born with the trauma inherited from her mother and her mother before. And so the intergenerational trauma carries forward every generation. So when she has her child, the trauma that she experiences, which would be contemporaneous for her, added to the intergenerational trauma that she would have inherited, all of that get passed on to the child. So then the child, when the child is born, even the trauma of childbirth, the child will live with that. And then as the child grows, whatever trauma takes place during that child's life, on top of the trauma that the child has already inherited,
Right.
keeps going forward.
So that's the multi-layered.
Well, that's the continuation of trauma.
Right.
What Carl Jung talks about, the collective unconscious. So for example, I don't know if you've had this experience where you go somewhere or you see something or you smell something and you could swear that you've been there before.
Absolutely.
That you've done this before.
Absolutely.
And you may go back and ask your mother and ask other relatives and be like, didn't we do this or didn't I? And they'd be like, no, we've never been there. I've never been there. And you would know that I've never been there. You've never been there before. So it is in a sense that when we talk about Jung's collective unconscious or even Freud's repetitive compulsion, is that it continues from generation to generation. So the experience that you had, that deja vu moment,
Right.
is something that somebody else way back in your ancestors experienced, and it has been passed on, and this is the way it represents in you, that you get that sense of deja vu. But that's just one aspect of it.
Right.
When we talk about contemporaneous trauma, when we talk about mental health, all of these, this continuum of trauma continues and literally affects us. But when we talk about contemporaneously, we're talking about exposure to violence.
Right.
We're talking about hearing gunshots.
Right.
We're talking about the stress that comes from not having food or having to go find food, or what a lot of people are not talking about, and Danielle alluded to it a little bit just now when he talked about the kinds of quality of foods that we eat.
Right.
Okay? So if we live in underserved or poor neighborhoods, you have a certain quality of food. So there's a thing called food racism. Okay? So you find that the quality of food, for example, that you will see in the South Bronx, in the Seatown or the Fine Fair, or the quality of food you see in Bed-Stuy, okay, or in Bushwick, or even in Harlem, parts of Harlem, East Harlem, and Washington Heights,
Right.
is different to the quality of food that you're going to find on the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side.
Yes, indeed.
You understand? And when I talk about quality of food, I'm talking about the quality of milk. Okay? I'm talking about the quality of bread. I'm talking about the quality of meat or the cuts of meat. Okay? I'm talking about the quality of fruits that you get, the quality of vegetables that you get.
Wow.
Okay? So what happens is, and researchers are now beginning to show that there is a direct connection between what goes on in your stomach, in your intestines, and your brain.
Right.
And so they're suggesting to us that the foods that you eat, if the foods that you eat are causing inflammation in the intestines, because they're poor quality, because they're mixed with lots of chemicals, then they disrupt the microbiome of the intestines. Then the signals that are being sent from the intestines to the brain tells the brain that this is not working.
Yeah. That's called the enteric nervous system.
People, this is some serious stuff that's going
It's-
on, and it's real.
You know the
Totally
saying,
real.
The other thing that Daniel was just talking about,
Yes.
and as he was talking, I was remembering as a child growing up in a town called New Amsterdam in Guyana.
Yes.
And I remember a family friend
Yes.
died. And this is the days when there weren't funeral parlors. So they would have the body in the mortuary on a stone slab. My mother and a couple of other women will go and dress the body and bathe and dress the body, and then they'll bring the body home in the coffin and put the body in the living room
Right.
with dry ice and a bucket
Oh,
underneath. Okay? But I remember this woman.
No, you're triggering memories in me now, Antoine. I remember back in the
Yes.
day where they used to have bodies being in the living room.
In the living room.
In
and
the
we
living
have-
room. And that
we
was
have-
so scary. That was something I...
No, and
Yes.
that was...
that was...
And,
come on
and we
now.
got the wake.
I'm
and
being
we're singing
triggered here now.
hymns.
Okay.
We have the wake, we're singing hymns.
Uh-huh.
The men are outside drinking liquor and drinking coffee and playing dominoes, and the women are inside and they're eating crackers, and somebody's cooking some food, and this goes on all night. But I remember this woman,
Right.
she worked at a plastic factory. And I remember that we used to go, because the plastic factory was not very far from my primary school. We used to go there to get the plastic beads.
Right.
Because what they used to do, used to bring in the beads, and it's the beads that they used to melt down. And she worked there for several years. And it was rumored, it was said that she died of an enlarged heart, but that she had begun to turn plastic. That her skin,
Literally turned
yes,
plastic?
her skin had begun to look plastic,
Ooh.
even while she was in the coffin. So while Daniel was talking about this, I was remembering
You
this.
sure it wasn't just the embalming fluid?
There was no embalming in those days.
I find what you're saying fascinating
But there was
because
no embalming in those days.
he's touched upon a couple of things. Ritual.
Uh-huh.
and mental health,
Right.
and that we've moved so far away from traditional rituals, hand-me-down, and stories. And I think that's very, very big.
And why you think that is, Daniel? I
think
got my theories and everything, considering we're living in this
well, I
microwave
think that
situation. We're living in this
I
microwave
tried to
environment.
explain this to somebody
Go
about
ahead.
slavery. And I said, if you look at a modern-day divorce,
Nobody wants no hand-me-downs, man.
well,
I mean, you know, I'm
well,
just.
it depends on how you look at it.
Come on.
Okay, you're equating something about a hand-me-down that doesn't have quality. I'm talking
Okay.
about tradition.
I wore many
I'm talking about
hand-me-downs.
tradition. I'm talking about African
Yes,
rituals.
absolutely.
I'm talking about totems. I'm talking about things that have spirit. Okay, things that are imbued with some kind of respect. We don't have that anymore. We're so far removed from that. So if you look at a modern-day divorce and the impact it has on a family, when a children are involved, particularly, think how gigantic that is. Now, think about the slave trade. Think of what happened in the Middle Passage. Think about all of that disruption, taking away music, drum, dance, language,
What about
religion.
separating children from their
That's what's
families?
happening now
Hello,
in
thank
Mexico.
you.
So when people tell me about cleaning up the environment, I care about the environment profoundly. But when you're looking at the modern day situation under this current administration and the fact that we have a person who suffers from mental health running the country,
Really? You think that's so?
I think so.
Yeah.
So you have children being taken from their parents.
Okay.
Do you really care about the turtle that has a straw in its nose? When you don't even care about the children, those are our children. Those are all our children. Every child is supposed to be our child. That's how I see it.
And why have we gotten, I mean, this is a question for both of you. Where have we gone haywire? Where has gone wrong? What has happened?
I think when I do talks on racism and intergenerational trauma,
Yes.
and I lecture at Touro College as well on LGBT cultural competency, one of the things that I talk about is the difference between cultures. So, for example, Mark Woolen, in an article that was published, I think in the Canadian publication Conversation, talked about the concept of weird.
The concept of weird.
Weird. And what I've done is I've looked at and suggested that when we want to talk about mental health for Black and people of color communities, we are using a Western European Freudian psychoanalytical paradigm. We're using a Western European psychoanalytical methodology, a way to do and treat mental health from a Western European. That's what we have. But let us ask ourselves, what was it that our ancestors used to treat and deal with mental health in the villages, in the communities? Okay? We need to go back to understanding that. And part of that treatment included drums and dancing
Yes.
and music
Yes.
and meditation
Right.
and communing with nature. Science research is now also telling us that there are various means that we can use to alleviate mental health or alleviate depression, such as getting back in touch with nature, taking walks where there are trees, exercising, even in increasing our interpersonal relationships. That a hug is important because as humans we need that physical touch.
That's interesting, that hug, that human touch.
Even a handshake.
But, you know,
But-
Antoine, that's good, in theory, but I speak to a lot of people, in my experience on the support line, who cringe a hug, who cringe a touch, because it triggers them.
That is true. And
So how we get past that?
well, I think one of the things that we are doing today that helps us to get past that is to remove the automatic or the spontaneity that comes. I see Danielle or I see you,
Right.
and I'm so glad to see you.
Right.
I give you a hug. It's a bit of a catch-22,
Right.
because I'll be glad to see you, So I'd be glad Cynthia and I
But
reach out and agree.
yeah, but you invaded my space. What else somebody
And
says
so
that?
we've got the issue of Joe Biden right now.
Hello, thank you.
But the thing about it is that if I have to stop and say to you, Cynthia, I'm so glad to see you. Can I give you a hug? That takes away from the spontaneity. You understand?
I understand.
But what might help, I think, is if I would have known beforehand that Cynthia has a problem with hugging, that Cynthia has an issue with touch, that it may mean that Cynthia may have had some experience of some kind of sexual abuse or some kind of sexual violence, and so a hug reminds her of the violence of that abuse. So Cynthia does not want to be hugged, would not like to be hugged unless she asks, her permission is granted. Now, then is where I would need to. So what I'm saying is today, there is no more the spontaneity
Right.
that I need to say to you, Cynthia, do you mind if I give you a hug? And then it's up to you now to say yes or no. Or no, I would rather shake your hand. Okay? Or we would, we'll do a fist bump because I'm not feeling a hug right now. Now, if I say to you, Cynthia, do you mind if I give you a hug? And Cynthia says, well, yeah, I'm feeling a hug right now. Okay? Then we know we can hug.
Yeah, I hear what
Okay?
you're saying.
And in terms of, and again, as Joe Biden has been talking about, and a number of women have been coming forward and talking about that invasion of their personal space, I think where we are today is because there have been so much trauma that so many people have suffered and have been inflicted on them, that they've had to live with, that has affected the course of their lives, that now that they're in a place where they're able to say, I have a voice, I can choose, and I can say, I don't want you in my personal space. Now, it is not for me to figure this out, but I think all of us will have to figure out how we approach physical interactions with each other, because those physical interactions are also essential for our mental health.
You know, Craig, Antoine, I need to cut you off right there. But as we start to wrap up, it seems like maybe we need an environment of love. We need an environment of caring. And as we start to wrap up mental health in you for this day, for this, what have we learned? Yes, about our environment, about the quality and the nature and the importance of it. It's important. It's okay to hurt. It's okay. But that quality of love, that environment, is so important. Till next time, we wish you peace. We wish you love and an environment of care. Good night.